Alright, here for our first video. This is going to have to be broken up into a few videos. It will be the longest ones that you'll do. Don't worry, they won't always be this long, but there's so many important things, so much storyline, and it's so important to understand, and I'm not even having you read everything that it would be good for you to understand because it's too much reading. So I'm going to try and cover the storyline a lot for you in the video. Now, I want you to know that the Bible starts out in an interesting way. You first of all have the large sweeping story. You've got creation of the entire earth, and then with Adam, and then all the nations spreading out from there. And then you have Noah and the destruction of man, and then all the nations spreading out from there. And then suddenly, that takes up through chapter 11, and then suddenly here at Genesis chapter 12, the whole world zeroes down to one man. And from here on out, the story of the Bible is about Abraham and his descendants. And the rest of the world is important only as they are involved with Abraham and his descendants. So it begins with Abraham, a hugely important figure for three of the largest religions of the world, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. He's a foundational figure, and for us, hugely important. And as we get into the Abrahamic covenant and things like that, you'll understand that more and more. So here in Genesis chapter 12, it begins. Now, it in some ways begins even more than that if we go to Abraham chapter 1. So I want to just go in my book to the part just before this. Genesis, Abraham chapter 1. Here we go. We get a little bit more of Abraham's story, and this is when he's come from this righteous line that are descended from the patriarchs that can hold the priesthood, but his own father and probably grandfather have become wicked, and he's preached against them, and as a result they've tried to sacrifice him on an altar that must be something like this, what we call a lion couch, and he's nearly sacrificed, and he's saved miraculously by an angel, and has to move. So now I'm going to show you this larger map. All right, and you don't need to know all of this, but just to kind of orient you, here's the Red Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, here's the Dead Sea, and the Sea of Galilee right here. So this is Canaan, or the Promised Land, for Abraham, and this is Haran, where he will move to. Now, most people believe that Ur, where he first grew up, is down here. It's pretty flimsy evidence for that. Really, it's based on a guy who wanted to get funding for his archaeology and knew he'd get more if this was a biblical story, and he has very flimsy evidence for that. It does have the name of Ur. There are a number of towns with names of Ur. We've in the past suggested some from around here just because the book of Abraham story gives us a few more clues. I'm starting to think that actually Ur may have been over here, and this would make sense in a number of ways, because then when Abraham has to escape some Egyptian influence, he's not going to flee closer to Egypt, as would happen if he lived here, and then he flees over here. He actually flees further from Egypt, and we know Egypt is controlling this area, but not this area, around the beginning of Abraham's lifetime. So my guess is that he flees from here to here. I don't really know more than that. In any case, we now get to Abraham chapter 12, where the beginning of the covenant establishment happens. He is being promised by God that the covenant, that we'll talk more in depth about as the class goes on, but the covenant will be established through him, and he's going to go to a promised land. And so he will go from Haran down to the promised land. So Haran is up and over here, and he then travels along this route and will eventually come to a place that he calls Jershon, and that is probably modern-day Jerash. Alright, so let's start out with this picture of modern-day Jerash, which is probably Jershon. If we were to go back to the map, as he comes down here, this is the route that he would take, and there's an ancient town here that maintains the name of Jerash, and it was common with some Aramaic influence to have a nun or an n put on the end. So I'm fairly positive that this would have been Jershon that Abraham stops in, and today it is Jerash. It became a huge Roman town, and so you see a lot of Roman ruins all along here. But this is a picture that, with kind of far enough away, you can get a feel for the just terrain that it would have been when Abraham traveled through. So there's another picture to give you a little bit of a feel for that, with a nice Jordanian flag in the middle. As a bunch of schoolgirls were on their field trip, but this just gives you a feel for the place. Now, it's very dry in the summer, but in the spring it gets beautiful with wildflowers. That's probably what it was like as Abraham went through. So he would have come down there and then traveled along the Jabbok River, which we'll hear more about later, and used that valley to get down into the valley that's created by the Jordan. This is what we call the Jordan Rift Valley, and the Jordan River goes along there. Cross over, and we know he stops in Shechem, he stops in Bethel, he will eventually stop in Salem, which we're fairly good chance, I think, is where modern-day Jerusalem is. But he will spend most of his time down in the Hebron and Beersheba area, these two areas here. Now, there's a reason that he'll spend most of his time down there. He's fairly nomadic, and he moves around a lot. At some time of the year, probably during the summer when it's worse down here, he will move all the way up to Shechem, and he spends time in all of these areas. But Egypt controls a lot of these areas. It doesn't have a lot of presence down here because it's kind of God-forsaken territory in some ways, and it's not that important to it. So its control starts, for the most part, up here around Megiddo and goes north, and but sometimes down around here. The further he is here in the central but southern central areas, the more likely he is to avoid Egyptian influence, which is something I think that Abraham will largely want to avoid. So he's going to end up spending his time in Hebron and Beersheba. So in the next video, I'll show you some pictures of Hebron and Beersheba. I actually need to get better pictures of Hebron and Beersheba. I really thought I had several pictures of those, but I can't find them. So in any case, this is one I found online of, this is probably not actually where Abraham spent most of his time, but this became a, well, there were Canaanites in this area, and then it also became an important Israelite town later. And there is an old well here, maybe from Abraham's day, maybe even he built it. But this is kind of away from the modern town. In the modern town, there were some wells there that are also very old, that are more likely probably where Abraham stayed. And the area is incredibly arid, and yet it has a lot of aquifers. And so if you dig down, you can find wells, and that's what happened with Abraham. So as we said, he ends up coming down here and spending a lot of his time down in these areas. All right, so he will then end up going to Egypt. So let's see if we can get to back to a good picture that will help us with that. Oh, shoot. Alright, so here is Beersheba, and he's going to come into Egypt. Most likely he'll come along this way, and we won't get into the whole complicated reasons for it, but most likely he ends up settling around here in the area of Avaris, where it's probably the beginning of the Hyksos era. Maybe not. He may have come further down, but most likely the stories of Abraham that we read about in the scriptures take place somewhere there in Avaris. So you can see that he goes down there, and this is a bigger thing than you think, and this is a tough test for them, and in many ways it's the toughest test for Sarai, who I think this is her Abrahamic test before Abraham even has his Abrahamic test, because Sarai is going to have to, and she's given this choice. She's told by the Lord she's going to have to say that, well, by Abraham from the Lord, that she's going to have to say she's Abraham's sister because Pharaoh will want to take her to wife. So she knows if she goes and does this and does what God tells her to, that she's probably going to be taken away from Abraham and have to be part of Pharaoh's harem. She chooses to do this, in essence, not knowing that in the end she'll be spared, that Pharaoh will have all sorts of problems to figure it out, give her back to Abraham. But as far as she understands, she is going to lose any land she's ever lived in, lose her beloved husband, and spend the rest of her life as a kind of a lesser servant wife of a person she probably doesn't like at all, from a kingdom she probably doesn't like at all. But that's what God tells her to do, and she's willing to do it. So she basically shows she's willing to give up everything, including the person she loves most, because that's what God tells her to do. And I'm impressed that both she and Abraham are willing to do that. Now, this is because Pharaoh figures this out. He ends up giving Abraham a great deal of wealth and sending him away, and this is part of how Abraham becomes a fairly wealthy person. So when he comes back, we get to chapter 13. When he comes back to the promised land, he's got with him his nephew Lot, and they are, because of the wealth they've accumulated, mostly in the form of livestock, and they are like modern-day Bedouin. They're nomads, and their wealth is all in sheep and animals, goats, some cows, and things have gotten to be so large for both of them that they can't stick in the same places. There's contention over grazing land, contention over water sources, and so they're going to have to divide. And Abraham gives Lot the choice. Where would he like to be? Where would he like to have his area? And Lot chooses the area that at the time seems to be the best. These plains down here and around here where there's a lot of grazing land, and leaves for Abraham the land up here that seems less good, although in the long run this will work out better. But this is a crucial division because Lot's going to move down and he's going to stay over in this area. We think this is probably where Sodom was, and he's going to stay along here. These are nice fertile plains, and Abraham will stay here. That's an important part of the story, and we'll continue with it in the next video. Alright, so after they make this division, that's when Abraham will start to stay even more in Hebron, though sometimes Beersheba, and moving up to Shechem and other areas. But Hebron will become kind of his hometown, and he'll purchase an area there, a cave where he'll be buried, and the burial site is still there, and that's where his son and grandson will be buried, and so on. But this is where the division happens. So, back to our story, we get to chapter 14, and this is when Lot is captured in a battle of kings. So, if we go down to here, Lot is staying down here, and some kings from the north form a coalition, and they come down and beat these kings in the south, and they take a number of them prisoner, which was common at the time. This is part of your booty, is to be able to have slaves, and Lot is among the group that is taken up to this area, what was then called Laish. It will later be renamed Tel Dan when the Israelites are there after the tribe of Dan, but at this time the name of it is Laish. Well, Abraham finds out about this, and he decides that he's going to go rescue Lot. So he arms all of his servants and everyone that's been with him, and it seems he's probably converted some people and so on. We'll talk about that in class. And he takes this great number of people, and he travels all the way up to Laish. So let me just show you some pictures of this, if I can find the right ones. This is the area that they're in. It's a beautiful area. This is some of the headwaters of the Jordan are coming right out of here. So here you can see right as the Jordan is just beginning. Just a beautiful, beautiful area. Here's some more of the headwaters of Jordan. And this is the area he's going to. We actually still have standing just a little bit. They've had to protect it from the weather, but this is the wall around the town of Laish from the Canaanite period, and this is a gate where you entered into it. Let me show you one more picture of that a little bit closer up. So you can see the mud bricks still left over from this wall and how they kind of arch over here, and there was a gate right here. So that Lot was held captive inside those gates, and it's quite likely it was this gate or another one very similar to it that Abraham went through when he rescues Lot. But he rescues Lot, and he then chases these kings and their men all the way up to here, and he takes spoils from them, and he returns back. And on his way back, he stops at Salem. Now this is an important point because there's someone very significant at Salem. Let me see if I can find the right picture. Alright, this is modern-day Jerusalem, and this is the area of the city of David, but we believe this really is Salem. It seems most likely it is Salem. And so you can see why they would settle a city up here, because it's so steep it's difficult for anyone to attack them. This is the Kidron Valley. You actually will have the Savior going back and forth around here and over here during his lifetime. But down around here is where you get the walls of the city that was there even before David, the Canaanite city. And so let me show you a few more pictures of that. Here you can start to see these are the old walls right here. And they went around here as well, but this is what's remaining of them. I'll show you a closer view. Here's some of that wall. Now here's the significant thing. This wall was built probably just a while before Abraham's day, from what we can tell archaeologically, and it was built by a king that had a great deal of power and could put together a big building project like this. Well, we know that Melchizedek was king of Salem, and that he was a powerful king. So he's very, very likely the person who built these walls, and it's just to the south of here. If we were to go back in this corner, this is what was called the King's Dale, and that is where Abraham met with Melchizedek, had the sacrament with him. At some point earlier in his life, he probably met with him there and was ordained to the Melchizedek priesthood. So these important things happen right around here. Now, this is an important thing to stop and consider. Abraham pays tithes to Melchizedek, and they have the sacrament. Abraham is continually engaging in rituals. So this is just a little map to show you all the different places he or his sons build altars. He or his son or grandson. He builds one in Jershon and Shechem. Jacob builds one in Bethel. He builds one in Hebron and Beersheba. He has rituals that he performs with Melchizedek here in Salem or Jerusalem. He is continually engaged in covenant making and partaking of rituals with the Lord. So when we get to chapter 15, he's starting to wonder how this covenant that the Lord has made with him will ever be fulfilled. How can the Lord possibly help him have children when he and Sarai have gotten so old? And the Lord renews the covenant with him and has him go through this covenant making process of dividing some animals in half and so on, which may have some symbolism of cutting a covenant with the Lord, which is the Hebrew phrase. In any case, the covenant is renewed with him there. Now, as Abraham and Sarai try and figure out what can we do to fulfill the covenant, what have we not done to maybe do our part, Sarai comes up with the idea of giving her handmaid that she got in Egypt to Abraham. So she gives him to Abraham as a lesser wife, and she does have a child, and they have some conflicts and so on, and she's taken care of. Eventually she will have the child, and she and the child will have to leave. We'll get to that later, but the child Ishmael will end up with a significant and wonderful covenant. It seems to be mostly the same covenant, but all of that happens during this part. So finally then, in Abraham 17, this covenant is renewed once again. And you see that he keeps entering into the covenant more fully as he goes along. And so you can read here about the covenant and the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision and so on, and the promise that they will have children. When we get to Abraham chapter 18, things get a little more interesting because, and as part of the contact that Abraham has with the Lord, and his covenant being renewed, he's given a visit. So let's see here in this book of mine, we have a nice little picture that depicts Abraham entertaining the three angels, and Sarai hearing them and laughing about being able to have a child and so on. But this gives rise to the whole idea of bartering for the safety of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham barters with the Lord, and the Lord is clearly willing to show mercy, and he just needs someone to ask for it in this case, and Abraham asked for it for them in a very Christ-like manner. And eventually then these angels are going to go down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and at this time they seem to be in a lush area. Sodom and Gomorrah seems to be fairly lush. So they start out here at Hebron, which is up in the tops of the ridge, the same ridge that Jerusalem is in. It's about 3,300 feet above sea level. And as they descend Sodom, and they're going to have to come and go around the Dead Sea, which may not be dead at that time, it may not be salt, I don't know. It's 1,380 feet below sea level. So you're looking at 4,600 foot descent and then another ascent later. And they will come and visit Lot here. And of course we know the story of how Lot protects them, and there's some interesting things in there we can talk about in class if you'd like. And eventually Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed, and they will end up being somewhat desolate like this. So this is looking out at the Dead Sea from the Jordan side, the modern-day country of Jordan, which is the side that they seem to be on, and that Lot will flee over into this side. And the Dead Sea will end up looking something like this, with all this salt and just some place that you really can't live as a result. So they're destroyed in there. And then we end up with Lot's daughters, as they flee and they think they're the last people on earth. Lot's daughters saying, well, we have to have children somehow. And this makes for another interesting story. As a result of their getting him drunk and sleeping with their father, we get the creation of the Moabites, who will settle down here. So this is Sodom, and this is part of why we think they were on this side. Will settle down here, and the Edomites, the Ammonites, who will settle up here. And so two of the people that you will encounter again and again come from this